From St. Louis Public Radio, this is Politically Speaking.
Congresswoman Cori Bush delivered a landmark victory in 2020 when she unseated longtime St. Louis Congressman Lacy Clay. 2 years later, Bush is on the ballot again for her first re-election bid since entering the U.S. House. On the latest episode of Politically Speaking, Bush talks about why she's a better representative for the 1st Congressional District than State Senator Steve Roberts, and talks about a multitude of issues that she could deal with if she gets another 2 years in Washington. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
We have to talk about things that matter to people.
I've tried to bring that same aggressive iconoclast style with me to the United States Senate.
I think my district is a model for the state.
We put Missourians first.
You just kind of have to find the common ground with people.
I believe that this district deserves someone who represents their values.
After I came back to St. Louis, I started thinking that I could have a bigger role on the change that I wanted to make.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, St. Louis Public Radio political correspondent Jason Rosenbaum. Joining me in studio today, she is St. Louis Public Radio's State House and Politics reporter,
Sarah Kellogg.
And joining us, she is the Congresswoman for Missouri's 1st Congressional District,
Congresswoman Cori Bush.
Congresswoman, thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to start off with a really simple question. Why should voters in the 1st District re-elect you as opposed to voting for your main opponent, State Senator Steve Roberts?
Well, while I was running for this seat, while I was campaigning before I was elected, one thing that I said that I would do is take St. Louis to D.C. with me. Another thing that I said that I would do was have the same energy that I had out on the streets of Ferguson doing the work to make sure that we were saving lives. That same intensity, that same courage and persistence and diligence, I will take that to Congress. And we've been able to do that. We've centered St. Louis in every single thing we do, even starting with just the fact that every time I hit that floor in Congress, I start with St. Louis and I rise. Every hearing, every time I speak, it's about St. Louis. And because of that, we've been able to bring in, because we've centered St. Louis and we've made it very clear that our fight has to be for this district, we've been able to bring over $1 billion to the St. Louis area in under 2 years.
You have been passionately critical of the Supreme Court's decision on Roe v. Wade and have sponsored a number of bills aimed at protecting abortion access. But if the Democrats don't hold on to the House and Senate, what can Democrats practically do to undo the Supreme Court decision?
So one thing that we are working on, we believe that the Supreme Court, first of all, having this Supreme Court that has been stacked with far-right leaning extremists that is working to strip away our fundamental rights. We know that Congress has an obligation to make sure that we don't allow that. If we don't hold the House, then what we're doing, we're already working with local groups. We're working with community organizations. We are working with prosecutors and DAs all across the country to help to localize some of this. And what we also know is we have stellar communities like what just happened here in St. Louis, being the very first municipality to pass legislation to make sure that the logistical support is there for our community members to be able to travel to another state to be able to have their abortion care and reproductive health services. So we have a lot that we need to do, but also we're putting pressure, continue to put pressure on other legislators on all levels of government to make sure that that the Supreme Court is held to a standard we, as Congress members, we have a code of ethics, but there is not a code of ethics in the Supreme Court. And they have the ability to be able to strip away our fundamental rights. It not only comes from Congress. We need that pressure. The pressure that comes from folks in our communities to the legislators, even if we don't hold the House. That is what we can continue to use to affect what's happening in the Supreme Court.
When we asked your opponent why he would be a better advocate for abortion rights than you, his response was that you, Congresswoman Cori Bush, should be focusing more on legislating rather than advocacy and protest. I think you deserve a chance to respond to that. What do you make of your opponent's comment?
We have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I think that we should be the best of ourselves and not just doing what people expect of us. I think that it's okay to do more things than what someone else would think is enough. And our community deserves our best and not just what we feel comfortable doing. So because of that, let me be clear, we've already passed 32 pieces of legislation through the U.S. House of Representatives, on top of bringing in the $1 billion and so much more. And not only, yes, I was arrested during a protest, because this was a protest in opposition to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which we should be doing everything in our power to highlight the issue, to keep the awareness up, but also use legislation to bring about the change. And so because I was actually out on the ground during the Ferguson uprising, because I spent more than 400 days out there, because I fought and I fought against the Muslim ban, because I've stood with our LGBT community, because I've stood out on the line with our union workers multiple times. Because I've done those things, I understand how change happens when people show up, when people voice their concerns. I understand how we were able to get the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment during the Reconstruction period, because people stood up and people use their voices, because St. Louis has a rich history of people standing up for change. We look at Percy Green and how he stood up for change. We look at, even if you only talk about Congress, I've been told multiple times how one of my predecessors, William Clay Sr., how he was this activist, and he was, and people revere him for his activism. So, and we revere John Lewis and call him good trouble. We revere him. But so why is it? So are we saying that all of those people were wrong? We're saying that John Lewis was wrong in the work that he did? No, we cannot erase the rich legacy of those, not only John Lewis, but those others in Congress that are activists, that were there during the civil rights movement, and those that are there today. And the same day that I was arrested, we also introduced legislation to protect abortion access. As a matter of fact, we were able to introduce three pieces of legislation that week, and it was only Tuesday.
I want to move on to the topic of Ukraine. You have voted against some sanctions against Russia in retaliation for their invasion of Ukraine, but you've also voted for some assistance, such as the $40 billion aid package in May. What would you say to people who feel like you haven't been tough enough against Russia, against what many feel is a brutal invasion of a sovereign country?
So actually what we did was, there was a resolution first to condemn the murderous Putin regime and his actions against Ukraine. We supported that bill. We've been very clear that we are in opposition to what is happening to the people of Ukraine at the hands of Russia. And so that is made clear. What we could not agree with was, as much as we do support a Russian oil ban, because in saying that we won't, with us receiving less than 10% of our oil from Russia, we understand that in saying no, we don't want this oil from Russia, because Russia has waged war against the Ukrainian people. Absolutely, we believe that. But what we could not do was open the door for Saudi Arabia then to give us. We couldn't turn to Saudi Arabia for oil, increasing oil from Saudi Arabia, who also has waged a murderous war against the people of Yemen. And that's happening right now when 19 million people are at risk for starvation, when humanitarian aid is being held up. Some of that is being held up by Saudi Arabia. So the murder of people is the murder of people, regardless of where you are in the world. And so I couldn't say yes to that. But what we did do was we wrote a bill. So we didn't just say no to that. We were saying no to adding to the death of the people of Yemen. But what we did was we decided to write a bill with a couple of our colleagues, and that bill was to authorize money for the president to use the Defense Production Act to increase production of clean renewable energy and for heat pumps. And actually, what happened was, even though that bill did not move in Congress yet, the president was able to use the Defense Production Act for just that same thing. And right now, we are at about $105 million that has been allocated through appropriations for that because of my bill and the bill that I have with my colleagues. So we were able to still get what we needed, and we were able to help the president by getting his work funded.
You voted against the infrastructure bill because you wanted the House to vote on a broader spending package known as Build Back Better First. And me and you talked about that extensively. And if you go back in the Politically Speaking archives, you can hear that entire episode. The question I wanted to ask you, since inflation is on everybody's mind, do you agree with some Republicans and even some members of your own party that increased federal spending right now exacerbates inflation? Or do you feel like some of these programs that you're advocating for are necessary regardless of the inflation issue?
So I don't believe that it will add to it. What I was just speaking about, that bill, that the Defense Production Act, the work that the president is doing, this helping lower gas prices, dealing with energy efficiency, actually would directly impact inflation, and that is something that has already started. So that's one. So we're attacking inflation that way. Also, this increase in spending, when we're talking about putting money in people's pockets so they can afford gas, when we're talking about making sure that children are able to go to school, 3 and 4 year olds are able to go to school, go to preschool with parents not having to take any money out of their pockets. They're able to put money into so many other areas that. Even if it's buying fresh food, even if it's spending money on moving from renting a home to buying a home, those things help. Those things help our communities. That helps the economy. So we're looking at it as, first of all, saving lives, but then also building people up. When people are able to pay for their medication and not have to make make a decision between paying for their medication and paying their rent. That helps our communities. When small businesses are able to pay their workers a livable wage, that helps our communities. When we are putting money for community violence prevention into our community so that those programs can help save lives and help the victims of violence to be able to rebuild, that helps our communities.
Congress passed legislation earlier this year providing money to states with red flag laws and bolster mental health programs. You voted for these bills, but what else would you want to do in the gun control space if you're reelected?
So right now, I can say that I am a proud co-sponsor of the Protecting Our Kids Act, which, raises the ages, for the purchase of assault weapons from 18 to 21, which we wanted more. But it also bans ghost guns, and it was very important to me to close the what is called the boyfriend loophole. But we are also working as we speak on the assault weapons ban. A lot of work is happening in Congress today, right now, on that legislation to pass it out of the U.S. House of Representatives. But then also we have to look at the broader scope of how we handle community violence prevention in our communities, because community violence affects us every day locally. And so we were big supporters of the Build Back Better, which had the $5 billion for community violence prevention to give money directly to community organizations that are doing the work to save lives directly. Currently, there is a bill in the House, Breaking the Cycle of Violence, from Representative Steve Horsford, that we are supporting to do just that. Also, we have our bill, the People's Response Act, and this bill, it would provide that evidence-based policy approach to reducing the contact with people who are in mental health crises, people who are having a substance use crisis, making sure that a professional, an expert in that field shows up if there is a crisis, versus having a police officer show up, and that would free up police to be able to do more police work and have the mental health experts deal with mental health situations. And also the money would go to community organizations, again, that do this work.
What are you doing as a member of Congress to break down historical barriers between the federal government and Black people? And I feel like I've been asking this question to Republicans, Democrats, not just African American politicians like yourself, but I feel like this is the most difficult issue in America today and has been for the past 200 years. I want to know what you're doing to make things better.
Well, one thing is I speak up about what's actually happening. On my third day on the job, there was an insurrection on the U.S. Capitol, and I was there. And so we introduced legislation, House Resolution 25, to investigate and expel any member of Congress who participated in the overturning of the Democratic election based upon Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Because we know we have to tackle white supremacy head on. And what that looks like is speaking up when we see it. It's the same reason why I, from the House floor, called out the then president, Donald Trump, as the white supremacist in chief. We understand that there are disparities in just about every area we speak about. And so when I talk about supporting Medicare for all, as much as we want more money in the Affordable Care Act, and we do, we want more money for Medicaid, we do. But I'm also pushing for Medicare for all to make sure that we close those disparities when we know that the Black community is uninsured at alarming rates. And so closing that gap is going to be necessary. So when I speak up and I'm fighting for canceling all student debt, even though I paid my student debt, I want to cancel all student debt for every person that holds it, because we know that Black women carry the most student debt in the country, and we carry it the longest. We need to close the racial wealth gap. When we out environmental injustice, we have to, because that affects our Black community members. And so when I'm pushing for a Green New Deal for cities, which partly was born out of conversations with local groups that work in the climate space, that is because of the report that came out locally, the environmental racism report. And one thing that it talks about, and I talk about it all the time, is just out of that report, one stat said that Black children are 10 times as likely to go to the emergency room for asthma than white children. When we look at the Black maternal health crisis, and the Black infant mortality crisis, how do we tackle those unless we speak about it and unless we address it? So I support it. I support the momnibus out of Congress, making sure that we're addressing the Black maternal health crisis. We know that Black women, even locally, are 3 to 4 times as likely to, and Black women and pregnant people are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy than white women and pregnant people. And the babies can be anywhere from 4 to 6 times as likely to die than white babies, speaking about Black babies. So we're fighting and pushing for all of those things, but we're also writing legislation to help to move the conversation forward. I am also vice chair of our vice chair on our poverty task force to make sure that we are addressing poverty head on And what that looks like is making sure that we're building communities. And so making sure we're doing the work to make sure that small businesses are able to have, or those that are building small businesses have the capital to be able to build those businesses. But then also we helped with the that paycheck protection program to make sure that that money was getting into this community. The second round, making sure that Black community members that were working to get those dollars, that they actually in the second round were able to get the dollars to help continue their businesses. And also, lastly, I'll say this, the Restaurant Revitalization Act, we were helping to connect people with those funds. We helped to increase the amount that was coming to this to the people of this country, and we were able to get quite a bit of help right here on the ground for those that needed it in St. Louis, because those are also jobs. And so we've been able to bring jobs to this community. The community funding projects that we supported, those are organizations and groups that are doing the work in our community, such as Affinia Healthcare. We were able to get $2 million for a new clinic that they will be opening once it's ready. We have money for organizations that work on crime prevention, money for housing. We support our veterans. We know I myself have been on the ground multiple times helping our unhoused veterans get into shelter. So it's everything, and we have to be willing to do all of the work at once, regardless of if it seems like it's a progressive thing. It's not progressive. It's not like we need to take off those labels and just help people, and so that's what we're doing. And we have to also save Black lives. And so when people criticize me for, she wants to defund the police, what I want to do is I want to stop the militarization of our police departments and take that money and put it directly into the community programs, our social safety net, because I know what it's like to not have the money to pay rent. I know what it's like to have utility shutoffs. I know what it's like to have slept in a car. I know what it's like to have suffered police violence on my physical person. I know what it's like to have worked low wage and been uninsured. I walked into Congress uninsured. I had COVID uninsured. When I went to the hospital, I was uninsured. I know what that's like. And so I want to stop that and prevent other people from having to live through what I've gone through and so many others.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time today. And I know that you have an extremely busy schedule. So if you want to provide our listeners with your website or any social media to follow your campaign, I want to give you that opportunity before you head out.
Absolutely. Our website is coribush.org. We have a lot of information there, CORIBUSH. And you can go there. There's also a reproductive justice hub for anyone who has questions about reproductive care, abortion care services. Who do I talk to? Where do I go? And you can always call our office at 314-955-9980.
Congresswoman, thank you very much for your time. Politically Speaking is a product of St. Louis Public Radio, which is a part of the University of Missouri St. Louis. You can follow me on Twitter at Jay Rosenbaum. You can follow Sarah on Twitter at
Sarah K. Kellogg.
And you can find all of our coverage of Primary Campaign 2022 by going to stlpr.org. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.